All right, Kevin back with you for another episode of the $1 Million Relationships Podcast. And today I am here with Gareb Shamus. Gareb, welcome. So awesome to have you on the show today.
Thank you. Love being here. Excited to talk about superheroes.
Yeah, and this is so cool the way that our relationship has started and how it unfolded. I need to start off, and I want to start off by giving a shout out to Giovanni Marsico because Gio is one of these guys. I've known Gio for over 12 years. I met him in Genius Network years ago. And, I still remember the time when him and I were in New York City together and we went out to dinner one night and he told me his vision. He shared with me this vision he had for this thing called Archangel. And as we sat at dinner that night and he shared that with me, I'm like, wow, that is absolutely amazing. And Gio, I am totally in. I want to be a part of this. And here it is now. It's been 10 years since he launched Archangel. It is absolutely amazing to see what he has accomplished with that already. But man, I'll tell you what gets me jazzed is where he's going. And so, I mean, because he is just getting started. And you and I were at his most recent event just a month ago in Austin. And that's where you and I met. And the crazy thing is, Gareb, when you were one of the people speaking from stage, in fact, first morning of that event, and when you were on stage, I was like, oh my gosh, you have got to be kidding me. And of course, I came and sat down and had lunch with you that day because I had a friend of mine who has an extensive comic book collection. But beyond the comic book collection, I knew there was some real opportunity for you and him. His name's Isaac. I don't have any problem sharing that. But so I got to get you guys connected. And what a testament that whole turn of events is to the power of relationships, which of course is what this podcast is all about. And I'm totally stoked for you and Isaac and what you guys now have going and stuff, because I ain't gonna lie, I got big expectations for you guys. And it's just such an honor being able to be that guy. But Gareb, what I want to do is I want to turn it over to you, and so we can set a little bit of context. I want to give you the opportunity to talk about what you do, who you serve, what inspires you most about the work you do and the impact that you're making. Because let's start there, and I'm excited to have you share.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, big shout out to Gio for connecting us at that event. Been friends with him also for many years. And he's just a big superhero fan. And, I've been in the superhero world my entire life. So anyone who loves superheroes is a friend of mine. And, and they're welcome in my world. And Gio runs these extraordinary events where he brings entrepreneurs together and really opens it up where it's not about him, and it's about everybody bringing their best to the table and sharing. And that's what I love the most about it. And that's what I love most about him and what the platform that he's created and the people that I've met through this. And they're just lifelong friends. And to be able to share like that, and that's been my whole life, is been able to, create a platform and share it with so many people around the world. I started out collecting comic books and sports cards. And then my mom opened up a sports card and comic book shop when I was a kid. And then I turned that into a newsletter about comic books back in the early 1990s. Okay. And shortly thereafter, comic book sales just took off in the store. So I turned it into a magazine called Wizard. And Wizard started selling all over the world, literally hundreds of thousands of copies a month, reaching millions of people. Wow. And then eventually I threw a party for our fans called the Comic-Con, and 20,000 people showed up. And it was really this magical experience, because up until that point, being a geek or nerd was being considered an outcast or an outsider or a loser or a loner. And when everybody got together and saw that there was a lot of people like themselves there, that gave them a lot of self-confidence. And that self-confidence emanated out of that building in such a way that people all over the world couldn't escape it. And starting that platform was really about people sharing their experiences and people coming together about something that they love and that they're passionate about. And that's really what my whole life has been about, is really how do I engage people, create a platform, create products, create anything that gets people to form community. And luckily, we've been able to reach hundreds of millions, some say even in the billion plus people around the world, the impact that we've been able to have by doing that. And I've just been so blessed to be able to share that, especially with everybody I know, my friends, my family, and so many people around the world.
Wow, that is so awesome. And I can only imagine how great that feels to just have the impact that you have had on so many people's lives over the years. And like you said, just bring like-minded people together to find out that, like, hey, there's a whole lot more people out there just like me. I found my tribe, and
Yeah,
what an
that's the best
amazing.
part about it. And that, people always ask me, and, did I know it was ever going to be that big? And the reality is no. Like, how could I have ever, dreamed that I was going to impact so many people around the world in every country? I was 21 when I started my magazine. So, and it was at a time in the early 1990s. It was pre-internet. There was no iPhones. There was nothing like that for somebody like me to be able to leverage all these people out there. And to be able to have that kind of impact was extraordinary, because it was only relegated to the big media companies to be able to reach that number of people. And the fascinating thing is that it permeated not just not in the comic, not just in the superhero world, but all over the world. So when you look at how companies interact with their fans now, they've borrowed so many things from what we did at Comic-Con to engage their fans. Number one, it's literally the respect, because now all of a sudden companies had to respect their fan bases and respect their audiences. And Comic-Con was, and what I did at Wizard was a blueprint for what companies can do in their industry. So it's everything from, beauty con to pizza con. It doesn't really matter. There's so many cons out there, that borrowed from what we had. So it's not just the impact we made in superheroes, it's now permeated almost every single category out there. Yeah. And but it just goes to show, I was a 21-year-old kid, I was a middle-class family in the suburbs, even though I grew up in Queens, New York. I was born in Queens. That anybody has an opportunity to have that kind of impact in the world. And it just goes to show that if you have an opportunity, a desire, a passion, something that you feel you can make an impact on, there's really nothing that can stop you from being able to do that.
Yeah. Amen. Absolutely. Well, Gareb, okay, so now that we've got a little bit of context set here, I'm going to reiterate the question for the benefit of our listeners. So, have you ever been introduced to a person or persons that completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not have been possible if not for this person or persons? And Gareb, I'm just really excited to hear your story and your experience around this topic of relationships.
Yeah, I think it's in my particular case, I think it's a connection. It's a combination of lots of different people in different areas. So, like, first off, like my dad, he grew up, I grew up where my dad was an entrepreneur. My dad never came home from work and said, oh, my stupid boss, my boss sucks, whatever, my job sucks. It was his company. So I grew up with a entrepreneur mentality that I go and I start something and I do something on my own and I could do that. And this is how I do it. So I never had that I need a boss mentality. So I think I got that, and just natural business, but then you also had somebody like Stan Lee, who was like a godfather to me in the comic book world. And when I was very young in the comic book world, when I was 21, 22, 23, I was able to meet Stan Lee, and he literally put his arm around my shoulder, like not just figuratively and literally, and told me how much he loved my magazine Wizard and how he wished he had it when he was growing up, and how wonderful it was, and how much he loved what we were doing and the impact that we were having, and that anything he can do to help us, he can do. And as a kid growing up where, Stan Lee was literally, you can't think of too many people on one hand, that have had an impact on life, than Stan Lee creating Spider-Man and so many of the characters that we love.
Yeah.
And for him to be able to put his arm around my shoulder and tell me how much he loved what we were doing, that level of encouragement was just unmatched.
Yeah.
And then I had a guy who was a big distributor out of Baltimore, Maryland, that his name is Steve Jeppy. He was somebody that distributed my magazine. And here I was this 21-year-old kid, but I looked like I was 14 and 15. And, and I told him how I'm starting this magazine and I need his help on distributing. And for him to take me seriously and for him to give me the credibility, that I needed or wanted at the time, was just unbelievable. So there's been these like incredible collections. And then, and then my mom too, I grew up in a very, very loving family, so and I have 3 brothers and we all grew up together and they're my best friends in the world. And, I credit my mom, for us having one of the most loving homes, imaginable. I had the greatest childhood. And so many people start things, out of fear or out of desperation, or they have to succeed, or something adverse happened in their life. And mine came from a different place. Mine came from a home of love, and connect. And I wanted to always do better because I came from a great place. And I really credit my mom for being able to create an environment where I felt safe, where I had the support of my family, in a loving way that was able to give me the self-confidence to do what I wanted to do. So I really kind of credit, quite a few people around my life that kind of had that impact in what I've been able to do.
Yeah. I mean, I love hearing stories like this. And like, and I like you, Gareb, I grew up in this very loving and supportive family. And I know a lot of kids didn't have the same kind of experience as you and I, and so we are really blessed in that regard. And my father, got diagnosed with cancer when I was in 9th grade, and at the end of my 10th grade year, he passed away when I was just 16. And so I lost my father early on, but he has had such a profound impact on my life, even though he's been gone for most of my life at this point now. And I'll never forget the lessons that he taught me, the work ethic that he gave me, and all of that kind of stuff that has gone with me for my entire life.
Yeah, it's incredible. I'm sorry to hear, and I lost my dad from cancer, a few years back. And I remember this one time. It was very early on with the magazine. It was around our issue 6 and 7. And this is back in 1992. And at that point, the magazine sales, the interest for the magazine was going like this, but our sales were going like this because of the natural way of the way people ordered the magazine. It was at a very low point. And I was very, very upset because I didn't know if I was going to be able to continue, because our sales were just they were decreasing and the bills were just coming in like crazy. And I remember one evening I went to my dad and I told him how the sales are falling and this is that, and I don't know if I can continue. And without any hesitation, without any sympathy, he's like, you only have one chance to make it work and you have to make it work. And there's no other option. And he didn't give me the sympathy. He didn't give me the empathy. He didn't give me anything that I was hoping for. But what he gave me was the strength to continue and realize there was no other option than to just move forward and do everything I can to make it work. And that was kind of like one of these defining moments where, where what you wanted something, you wanted that easy way out, or you wanted that out, and he didn't give it to me. And it was just amazing, because right after that, I was like, all right, I have no other choice. I have to make it work. And then that mindset went into high gear. And then we probably about 2 months after that, we had some of our best sales ever. The whole thing turned around. We started doing some really interesting things, putting trading cards in the magazine. And then all these artists left Marvel to and because so this whole kind of series of events happened shortly thereafter that, that just exploded for us.
Yeah.
I really kind of use that as my defining moment with my dad.
Wow. Wow. That's phenomenal. So if you look back, so I want, if we look at a situation or an experience where that you had where you personally made a substantial impact, where you made a big impact, where you were like going, wow, that was amazing. And you also know, hands down, that would have never happened if not for your relationship with whoever that was. What is an example of something like that, Gareb?
So that happened early on in the magazine, and I've got
Okay.
literally hundreds of those kinds of things because I was
Sure.
a big driving force. But when I first did my first issue of the magazine, we were friends with this artist named Todd McFarlane, who's like a global superstar now. And at the time, he was the best-selling comic book artist, and he did Spider-Man. And he was friendly with my dad and me and my brothers, because we bought his comic book art, his original Spider-Man art. And we called him up and I asked him to do a piece of art for my dad for his birthday. And it was Spider-Man in a wizard costume. And Todd did it. And he doesn't do that for anyone. And to this day, I still have not seen him ever create an original piece of art for anyone.
Wow.
And he did a piece of art for my dad. And then ultimately I wanted to use that for the cover of the first issue and interview him for the first issue. Okay. So I called him up and I asked him if I could do that. And he said yes. And he agreed to do the interview. And when we launched with the #1 artist, with the #1 character on the cover of the magazine. And it was huge. And then what that led to was what I had mentioned earlier about these artists that left Marvel. It was back in the summer of '92, I believe, where 7 of the biggest artists in Marvel decided to leave Marvel and form their own company called Image.
Okay.
And all these artists, including Todd McFarlane, were all around my age at the time. We were all kind of in our early to mid-20s. And because I liked all the new guys and new art, I started reaching out to them early on about working with me. And then ultimately, and they didn't do my covers. We didn't do that many interviews with them. I was still kind of getting in with that crowd, so to speak. And then when they decided to leave Marvel, then I was the first phone call. Wow. When they wanted to get the word out, yep, I was the first place they went to for it. So it was kind of like a year of me pursuing these guys leading up to that moment that when they left Marvel, we became the only source of information for those artists to get the word out. And included Todd McFarlane and Jim Lee and Mark Silvestri and like this incredible eclectic group of people. Yeah. And Rob Liefeld. So all of a sudden, we were the only place that people go to find out what was happening. And then my magazine just took off. Yeah. So it was kind of this relentless pursuit of what I believe to be the future of the industry. And I didn't know any of this was going on. And then when it happened, we were in the right place at the right time.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Isn't that something? Yeah. And like you said, I'm sure you could come up with countless stories like that. And, and it's so interesting because, something that I have personally believed for many years now is that as entrepreneurs, I firmly believe that relationships are our most valuable asset. Everything else stems from that. And quite honestly, when we get the relationship piece right, man, I'll give an example. We'll go back to you and Isaac, getting you guys connected. It was so cool to get on Zoom with you guys and just watch you guys go back and forth and just your love of comic books and comic book characters and all that. It was so evident between the two of you, and you had this shared passion. And I'll tell you what, when then the business piece becomes so simple and so easy. And, Isaac and I, we already had a time scheduled to talk, him and I, the next day on something else. But he was even commenting, he's like, Kev, he's like, that was so awesome. And he's like, he's like, when you just bring like-minded people together like that and just watch the ease and the flow at which things happen, And and that's of course what this podcast is all about, is
Yeah,
relationship.
it really
Yeah.
is. I love talking to people that have that passion, and it doesn't matter where they are, what they come from, who they are.
Yeah.
That was our theory, at Comic-Con, which, and with the magazine, was like, we don't care who you are, what your background, what your race, religion, your ethnicity, your wealth factor, like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, you're welcome here. Like, if you love
Yeah.
superheroes, you're welcome here.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of things that I did early on, that I didn't realize the impact it would have, and it's become generational, and I didn't know it at the time because it took decades for it to manifest. But I did a couple of things in both the magazine and at the Comic-Cons. What I did at the magazines was fascinating because I had about 4 or 5 monthly magazines by the late 1990s. I had Wizard, which was about comics and superheroes and everything movie, television, toys, gaming related. I had an action figure magazine called Toy Fair. I had a gaming magazine called Inquest Gamer, which was all about Magic the Gathering and tabletop and board games and things like D&D as well.
Okay.
Dungeons and Dragons. And then I had an anime magazine called Anime Insider. So we were at the birth of this wave of anime and manga coming into the US. So we were at the base, at the heart of so many of these extraordinary trends that happened around the world. And what I would do is when we would print the magazines, I would take literally like a case of magazines or handfuls of magazines and put everybody in the PR departments or the producers or the directors or the head of, you name it, at the studios, at every single movie studio, at every production company, at every toy company, at every video game company, at every television network. I would send out cases and cases of magazines. And I knew that they would wind up, like, if the PR director at Hasbro got 40 magazines of Wizard, they're not going to just leave them on the floor. They're going to hand them out to everybody they know that likes comic books and likes action
Sure.
figures.
Yeah.
And I probably sent out, I would say, about 10,000 magazines a month between all the magazines. And what happened was I would meet people and be like, oh, I get your magazine. I work at this studio. I work here. And we built a following that was unbelievable because everybody that I needed to get the magazine in these places were getting the magazine.
Yeah.
So so the magazine felt like it was much bigger and it was more pervasive than it ever was, because everybody that was in those positions at similar companies all read the magazines.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was at MTV one day, I was meeting with my friend who was head of licensing, and the head of programming called up and said, hey, I heard Gareb's here. I got to meet him. And the head of programming for MTV, who did Beavis and Butthead, like the biggest shows at the time, came down and he was like, oh my God, he goes, I've been reading your magazine for years. He goes, I wanted to meet you. He goes, when I first got it, I thought it was a video game magazine. He goes, I don't care about video. He goes, but of comics. He goes, and then I started reading, and he's like, so like became the best friends with him. And then the second thing that we did was I made sure that every month in the magazines we featured new artists, new writers, new companies, new games, new storylines, you name it, like whatever was new coming out. I wanted to make sure we were there first. Okay. And I did it, I don't want to say for selfish reasons, but for selfish reasons, I wanted to make sure that nobody could be successful unless we wrote about them first. Like, I wanted all the credit, I was a young guy with an ego, and I wanted all the credit for breaking everyone's careers.
Uh-huh.
But then you cut to decades later, and all of a sudden, something else happened, which is people like remember that they got their first break, from what we did. We featured them at a Comic-Con. We featured them in one of the magazines. And all of a sudden, it brings up this like heartwarming story that if it wasn't for us, that they wouldn't have gotten their break. The movie studio saw what they did. The video game company saw what they did. They got a toy deal. They got something because they were able to show my magazine or show their Comic-Con appearance on stage to somebody important and say, look at what the industry leader says about us. And it was only decades later that I started feeling that impact, where he introduced me to his son and said, if it wasn't for this guy, we wouldn't be in the house that we're in, and this woman that started a company that made T-shirts for Star Wars fans, but for girls, not for guys. And I gave her a booth at one of the shows. I didn't even remember. But she told me how she gave a booth. I gave her a booth just because I wanted her to have a presence there. She didn't have the money to set it up. And that started her whole career because she sold a lot of shirts at the show, and then it led to one thing and another thing. And if it wasn't that first break, that we gave her, right? So all of a sudden you hear these crazy stories of the impact that we had, and it was only decades later. And it just goes to show that, that the I got because of what I gave. And and you don't realize it at the time. That was kind of the bigger thing here, was at the time it wasn't like I was like, oh, this is going to come back to me or this, whatever. It's like, for me, I was doing what I thought I needed to do to survive and to succeed. And it was only afterwards did I realize the impact that it made on so many people and their lives.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. That was really powerful, Gareb. And you're right. Yeah. When we give, and we get to be on the receiving end too and stuff. And the more we give, the more we receive, and the more we receive, the more we're able to give. And I really appreciate you sharing that story, because I know for a fact, well, all my life, I've been this giving, generous guy. For most of my life, until 12 years ago, I totally sucked when it came to the receiving side. And over the last 12 years, in me placing an intentional focus on okay, I'm going to just open myself up to be able to receive more and stuff. And it has been an absolutely amazing experience, just like what you just talked about there. And I used to think too that oh, well, really successful entrepreneurs, they've got this figured out and they're good at both giving and receiving. Not necessarily. In fact, 80-20 totally applies, regardless of how successful somebody is. Most of them, they're not that great at receiving. And it sounds like you've come a long ways, just like I have in that department. And I love hearing stories like that, because it's just so inspiring. And of course, it's what this podcast is all about. And I want to thank you so much for taking your time to have this conversation, just to share from your heart today. And I'm really excited to get this out there. But I know there's going to be people listening to this that are going to be like, wow, man, that was absolutely amazing. I love Gareb. I love the way that he shows up. How can they find out more about the work that you guys are doing? Any websites, any resources you feel led to share?
Yeah, the best thing to do is to read on social media. So it's at Gareb Shamus on Instagram. I'm at Gareb on Twitter. And, those are kind of the best places to reach me. Also, I have a website, GarebShamus.com. So one of the other things that I do is I'm also a professional painter and artist. And I started painting about a little over 8-9 years ago. And I needed my own voice, to be able to share my thoughts and my emotions and my dreams. And also I'm a very optimistic person. So I needed a place to kind of share that. And I found painting was very meditative for me, but it gave me a chance to share, being very positive and optimistic with a lot of people. Because, as I mentioned earlier, my life comes from a place of love. The same thing with my art. I've been very blessed in life, and most art comes from, something bad that's happened in someone's life. Think about all the songs people write about broken hearts, right? And lost love and relationships, right? And so much art comes from a darker place. Sure. And I've been so blessed. I wanted my art to come from a very positive and very optimistic place. So I started creating this pattern of drops that reach out to people. And it was just kind of a way to reach out to people and share that optimism. And these patterns that I create, it really resonates with people. I didn't think it would the way it does, but it just does, because I have a very strong voice of what I want to say and make people feel good when they look at my art. And so I have that on my website at GarebShamus.com.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, if you're listening to this and you feel inspired, go ahead, head over to Gareb's website and check that out. I'm gonna go check it out now too. So, well, Gareb, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. I'm just stoked to get this out into the world and share it with a whole lot of other entrepreneurs, founders, and CEOs, because I know how inspiring this is going to be for them. So, Gareb, thank you so much. Really appreciate you.
Thank you. Love talking to you. Thank you.